Today, we feature an archive edition of River to River from Iowa Public Radio News. It's River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kieffer. Coming up later in the program, the debate over the Save America Act. First, a recent conversation with two members of the Planet Money team about their new book, Planet Money, A Guide to the Economic Forces That Shape Your Life. I spoke with the lead author and longtime Planet Money contributor, Alex Mayasi, and Planet Money co-host, Kenny Malone. I understand the big idea behind this book is that economics isn't really about markets and charts. It's about our everyday lives. So what made you want to write this book now? I mean, we've heard about Planet Money for 2 decades.
I think there are a few things. One is that we know that lots of people listen to Planet Money and they find it very helpful for learning about the economy, for understanding money better. But we really felt there would be a lot of value in producing a book, this kind of like one guide you can hold in your hands that would feel comprehensive, go through different parts of your life, work and career, saving, investing, your personal life, even finding love, so that you could get a lot of these like powerful ideas in one place. And then there's just a lot of things that you can do in a book that you can't do in radio. So we got to explore with the forum. We have these, amazing, sometimes surrealist illustrations. There are times, in radio and podcasts, you have to stay really focused on the main idea. But in the book, we could have these sidebars where we explain other ideas. And so that was really exciting and part of the impetus for writing a Planet Money book.
Yeah. And Ben, this is Kenny. If I may, it also, the timing is partially, as we reveal in a series about making the book, it's partially because 3 years ago, a couple of book agents who were retained by NPR came to us and said it might make sense for Planet Money to write a book. So cards on the table, that's part of it too.
All right. Planet Money does a really good job of storytelling, making economics very personal to us. But I want to talk about, first of all, one concept that you would put forward that would make our lives better. If you had to pick one economic concept, what would it be?
Ooh, that's a
I bet Kenny and I are thinking about the same thing.
Oh, I'm curious. I want to
see if you're lined up or if you've got different ones. Yeah.
Do you want us to? Here, let's count to 3 and say the idea. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Marginal utility.
Compound interest.
Okay, all right, different ones. All right, I'll go first then. So to me, I love the idea of marginal utility, which sort of boils down to like, how much usefulness am I going to get out of the next thing, whatever it might be. So a classic example is like you're at a bar, you're having some drinks. Like I would love to have the 3rd beer, the 4th beer, but like how much happier is that beer really going to make me? And this applies to everything. Like how much more will the extra vacation benefit me? How much more will the extra TV show on that night's binge watch benefit me? And I think it's just really nice to put these kinds of guardrails up for ourselves and really think through the marginal utility of anything that we're dealing with. I love marginal utility. That one's mine. But Alex, not yours.
Alex?
I mean, what's funny is that mine comes from an amazing story that Kenny Malone reported.
That's true.
For Planet Money. And then we include the book because it's such an amazing story. And so it's about compound interest. And I think many people listening have probably gotten the advice to start saving money for retirement as early as possible. Put it, save it, put it in the stock market.
Now, if you're listening, start saving now. Start saving. Do it.
Right. And so there's this idea that, because it's really important to do it early. And why is it? I think even people who understand compound interest, it's like, and I say this about myself, it kind of breaks your brain to really dig into how powerful it is. So, we explain this through the story of Bobby Bonilla, who was an amazing baseball player, huge slugger. And near the end of his career, he's playing for the Mets. He's making about $6 million per year. And he doesn't have a great season. So after the season, the Mets are kind of hoping that they could, get him to play for a lot less money or otherwise get that money back. And so they come to this agreement where Bobby Bonilla says, I won't demand my salary now, the $6 million a year you owe me, but I want you to pay me that money, starting something like 20 years in the future in kind of yearly increments. And so he ends up making $30 million from the Mets. And, Mets fans go insane because this money is still being paid out every year. So there are years where Bobby Bonilla, who's been retired for, over a decade at this point, is making more than like active Mets players. And it seems like the Mets are so dumb. Why did they do this?
It's so funny.
But actually, this is like textbook economics. Like if someone were to invest $6 million, a few decades ago, or give up $6 million a few decades ago in exchange for that money in the future, if you put that money in the stock market or some other, kind of way that a normal person might save for retirement, or this is the way pensions work, $30 million is how much money that would be worth in the future. That is just that's how everyone's retirement plan works. So compound interest, extremely powerful. Start saving now. Like it's kind of unbelievable how much money can snowball if you give it enough time. So even if you don't have tons of wealth, saving, starting early, huge. It can make a huge difference.
Alex and Kenny, Planet Money, a guide to the economic forces that shape your life. This book also talks about automation and AI, whether this technology will help us or replace us. When you look at the economy right now, what changes do you think will most affect how people work over the next 10 or 20 years? We all know 20-somethings or younger people, well, legitimately kind of freaking out, like what's going to be left there in the job market, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there very much is a narrative right now that AI is replacing entry-level jobs. And I think I would like to communicate that there's a lot of uncertainty and debate about that because, we can't create two universes, one where we invented chatbots and AI and one where we didn't, and then see what happens. So there's a lot of other things going on too. There's the tariffs and trade war from the Trump administration that's caused a lot of business uncertainty. That's led a lot of companies to, pause expansion plans or to be very cautious about hiring because they're uncertain about the future. So I think AI is absolutely a powerful force. And I do have my own concerns about, I do hear people talking about cutting back on entry-level hiring as a result. But I think, I don't want young people to buy into this narrative too much. There are multiple reasons behind that. And I think there are reasons we could see very healthy entry-level hiring in the near future as well.
Mm-hmm. Comment a little bit about, for listeners in Iowa and the Midwest, the economy means often agriculture, manufacturing, small towns, housing. What economic trends should people in smaller communities be paying attention to right now?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like what we're hearing and what we're seeing has a lot to do with the ways that agriculture has been impacted by the on-again, off-again tariffs. And I assume your listeners have felt some of this. Obviously, depends a great deal on the products, what's being exported, what's being imported.
And the war as well. Yep.
Yeah. And the war as well. So it's difficult because these things are changing so frequently, and they do feel like on again, off again things. But the thing that the issue that has not been on again, off again are prices. People are feeling the squeeze from the periods of inflationary growth that we've seen. And so when people go to the grocery store, they are seeing these prices and people are feeling these prices. And one of the things we end up talking a lot about on Planet Money is the way that we might want these prices to go back down, but that simply is not the way that the economy works. Inflation goes up, and the best we can hope for is that eventually salaries catch up to this inflation and then inflation starts to slow. But I would say affordability is probably the number one thing that we're hearing about as an issue from everybody.
Mm-hmm. Is there an economic story right now that you think is very, very important but not getting enough attention?
I have an answer that's a little bit subtle. And I think there's this field or subfield of economics called market design, and it's present in several chapters of the book. And so market design really got started when economists started looking at kind of unusual markets. So an example is like kidney donations. We don't buy and sell kidneys. So how do you try and figure out the most efficient way to match donors to patients? Economists did work on that. And then they started looking at other types of markets where, maybe you need more central coordination than your kind of standard, just letting people buy and sell on their own. And I think as that field has advanced, there's just this growing recognition that, every market is designed. I mean, we often think of Wall Street as kind of like unfettered capitalism, but they literally have hours where the market opens and when it closes. And they have these kind of rules. Like if, certain stock prices go super haywire in a short amount of time, there's kind of like a circuit breaker where we stop trading so people can figure out what's going on. Like there are all these rules that have been put in place to make Wall Street and financial markets work better. And I think that's true all around the economy. And there's this growing recognition that like, it's not a question of like, are regulations good or bad? It's just about looking at each case and being smart about it and how to get the kind of fair and efficient outcomes we want. And so I think that's a very underrated idea that I think we'll see more and more of that can be very powerful for how to think about to make markets more fair and get the outcomes we want while also maintaining the efficiency that grows the entire economy.
Kenny and Alex, we don't have much time, but in a few words, if you could eliminate one economic myth forever, what would that myth be?
That's a big one. Alex, you have one that comes to mind? We won't count to 3 this time and do it again.
Yeah. I think the first one that comes to mind, we were talking about automation earlier, and there's a kind of famous fallacy called the lump of labor fallacy. And so this is the idea that if certain jobs get automated or certain tasks get automated, people are worried, oh, there'll be less work for me to do, for all of us to do. So there'll be fewer jobs. And, what we see throughout economic history is the opposite, that like human needs and wants are unlimited. So, agriculture used to be like something like 70% of the population of the workforce not that long ago. And of course, we've automated agriculture. It's become so much more efficient. But that doesn't mean that, there was nothing for all those, farm hands to do. People moved to the city and work in factories. And today, like probably something like 70% of the population are working jobs that did not even exist, 100 years ago. So that's the lump of labor fallacy. And I think it's very helpful to think about in terms of automation, that like there always the potential for like some jobs will go away. That's always happening in dynamic economy, but there's always more jobs, new things that we can do.
Alex and Kenny, thank you so much. And congratulations on your new book, Planet Money, a guide to the economic forces that shape your life. Take care, Alex, Kenny.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ben. This was great.
You've been listening to an encore edition of River to River. It's River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kieffer. Today we're listening back to a show from April of this year about the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, or the Save America Act. It's a bill that would change requirements for Americans to register and vote. The SAVE Act is still held up in the U.S. Senate. In June, President Trump refused to sign a bipartisan housing bill because of the SAVE Act, and in July, he made a social media post calling on Senate Majority Leader John Thune to cancel the chamber's August break until senators pass the bill. Thune has said repeatedly that the legislation does not have the needed votes. House Republicans have also attempted to create another path for the legislation through the budget reconciliation process. In late July, the House approved a budget framework that included $10 billion for voting-related changes aligned with the Save America Act. But Thune has said Republicans don't have the votes for that approach either. So what is in the SAVE Act? How might it affect Iowans? Let's listen back to that conversation from April. It's been called the most sweeping change to American voting law in decades. When we walk into a polling place here in Iowa, we already show our ID, and that's been our state law since 2017. But Congress now debating whether to go much further, requiring proof of American citizenship, a passport, a birth certificate, not just a driver's license, every time you register or update your voter registration. It's called the Save America Act. That's SAVE, it's an acronym, Safeguard American Voter Eligibility, passed in the U.S. House in February with support from all members of Iowa's House congressional delegation. It's stalled in the Senate, but the debate isn't going away. Iowa's entire congressional delegation, the U.S. senators, too, back it. Here is U.S. Senator Chuck Grassley. He spoke on the Senate floor in support of the Save America Act back in March.
I'm co-sponsor of SAVE Act and the Save America Act. I support free, transparent, and accurate elections. Every American deserves absolute confidence. There's no funny business distorting election outcomes. Let me tell you about the track record in my home state of Iowa. Voter ID laws in my state have been successful and well received since passage in 2017. Iowa voters turnout increased in the 2018 midterm elections, and turnout has continued to remain very strong. So, the proof is in the pudding. Iowa's track record demonstrates voter ID improves integrity and security of our elections.
Senator Grassley back in March. Senator Grassley declined an invitation to join our program today, citing scheduling conflicts. Let's hear from a House member from Iowa. Iowa Congresswoman Ashley Hinson of the 2nd District, also in March, said that she wants to see the SAVE Act passed. It did pass the House, remember. She said there had been some wrong information circulating on providing documents, including that it would be tough on women who changed their name when they got married.
I think that's just fear-mongering. I am very frustrated by that narrative. I am a married woman who changed my name, and why would I vote for something that is going to make it harder for me to vote for myself, being someone who's actually on the ballot? It's ridiculous.
Representative Hinson's team did not respond to an invitation to join this program. Today, for the rest of the hour, to test these assertions, we'll test these assertions you just heard by our elected members of Congress. Look at what's actually in the bill, what it would mean for us as Iowa voters, what it would mean for the people who run our elections. Joining us, Dave Peterson, Lucan Professor of Political Science at Iowa State University. Hi, Dave.
Hey, Ben.
Dave's here to provide us with historical, political science context on this proposed law, and the SAVE Act. Adam Wedmore with us as well. Adam is a Cerro Gordo County Auditor, former president of the Iowa State Association of County Auditors. Hi, Adam.
Afternoon, Ben. Great to be here.
Good afternoon to you. You're here to tell us what would actually change for the work of county auditors and election workers. And we have Linda Sarah Hagedorn with us, Vice President of the League of Women Voters of Iowa, also Professor Emeritus of Iowa State University. Linda, welcome to you.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
Giving us the voter advocacy perspective. Want to mention, too, that the Secretary of State's office declined an invitation to join our program. Let's jump in with you, Dave. The basics. What are the major new things the Save America Act would actually require? Would it be different from what we already do here in Iowa?
Sure, Ben. I mean, so the big difference that the Save America Act will have is changing what's required to register to vote, right? So in Iowa, we have voter ID, which Senator Grassley talked about in the clip you played, where we have to show our identification that proves who we are and our address when we show up to vote. The Save America Act focuses a lot on the actual act of registering to vote in the first place, right? What does it take to get on the voter rolls? And the main emphasis here is that you have to prove your citizenship when you register to vote. Currently, in most states, you have to essentially sign an affidavit that says you're a citizen, but you don't have to actively prove it to register to vote. And now, the proving that you're a citizen to register is not as simple as showing your ID. I think it's only in 5 states where your driver's license, and Iowa's not one of them, where your driver's license actually is proof of citizenship. Instead, what you have to have is something that proves your identity, like your driver's license, and something that proves your citizenship, like your birth certificate, right? That shows that or that you've been born in this country, or if you've been naturalized, your naturalization papers. And those things have to match, right? So the concern that Representative Hinson was arguing against is that what happens if your name changes between your birth, that's recorded on your birth certificate, and what is currently on your driver's license? What if they don't match? Well, if they don't match, it doesn't prove you're a citizen. right? Because that there is a discrepancy there. And for millions of Americans, married women who change their name is the most common example. But there are a lot of people, myself included, who legally change their name during their life. And so if I were to have to do this, I would have to show my driver's license and my birth certificate and an original of the court documents that showed that I legally changed my name. It also makes some other changes that I'm sure some of the other guests might talk about, right? It means that we cannot have registration pushes for registration anymore, right? So at Iowa State University, every fall, there's a registration drive. Can't do that because people won't be able to prove their citizenship. There's open questions about what this would mean for online registration, about whether that would be allowed. Instead, what we would have to do is drive to our local county seat, probably where the county auditor is, to be able to prove our citizenship if we want to change registration. So it creates this massive set of burdens on people to register or update their registration for voting.
Yeah, and to emphasize here, while those of us traveling by plane, we now all need a real ID, that star on our driver's license. That, you may think, because it's good enough for TSA, is not proof of citizenship, just to emphasize that, right, Dave?
Right. At least in Iowa, it's not. There are some states that it is, but in Iowa, it's not. Again, we because of federalism, we decentralize all of this, and we have 50 different states with 50 different sets of rules for things like driver's licenses, and then we've got 3,000 counties that have 3,000 different electoral systems, slight subtle variations in there. And so we've got this really decentralized process that isn't a one-size-fits-all or a single set of rules for all Americans.
Yeah, so much going on here, and Dave, you covered it very well there. We want to put off to the side the executive order that the president signed in the end of March directing the DHS to create a nationwide list of verified eligible voters in each state. Let's set that off to the side. We've got plenty to work with right now. Adam Wedmore, let's go to you. Cerro Gordo County Auditor, former president of the Iowa State Association of County Auditors. I want to look at, just walk us through what changes for you if this becomes law. What does your job as county auditor look like the morning after the Save America Act takes effect? Because it would be for these midterm elections, in effect. I presume it could be anyway.
Yeah, that's our understanding of it anyways, that should this be signed into law, that it would be effective immediately, which would raise a lot of questions for each of the 99 county auditors of how we would actually implement this new requirement. In Iowa and most states, we are not very federally focused in that we are, because of the decentralization and federalism, our election laws stem from our state legislature, so we're very in tune with those. We have conversations with them, and then those are then interpreted and enforced by our Secretary of State's office, and we use our Attorney General as well as our county attorneys to help us interpret exactly how things should occur. Something like this, of this magnitude, we would certainly be looking to our legal counsel and our Secretary of State's office to help us identify what exact documents would be acceptable, hopefully try to get some information and some training of how to verify that these documents are legitimate and accurate and valid. And then that ongoing question of who does this affect? We've already been receiving several phone calls and emails from people across the state who are asking questions from their auditors of, does this mean I have to show a passport every time? I'm already registered. Mm-hmm. Do I need to prove citizenship again? So those are the questions that we would also have to work on the voter education side. Mm-hmm. Currently in Iowa, there's 3 different acceptable forms of an application, if you will, that voters can fill out to register to vote. And on each of those forms, there's an attestation that the voter meets all the requirements, and very specifically, they have to attest that they are a United States citizen, and they have to attest that they are subject to prosecution and fines if they make a false statement on that form. So those forms can come in the mail. They can come through the Department of Transportation electronically. The voters can drop them off in our office as well. What this legislation would upend all of that, and the fact that we would now need to physically see and prove that that individual is who they are and that they are a citizen, at the time of their registration, which means all voter registrations essentially would have to be in a face-to-face method from our understanding.
Wow. And Adam, as a county auditor, I understand preparation for a general election starts 2 or 3 years out. We have the 2026 midterms in a few months. Where does this legislation fit in that timeline? Given that the midterms are approaching, that has to be, all hands on deck. This is an exceptional situation if you need to get ready for November. Are you worried about that? Are other auditors worried about that?
Well, I can assure you that auditors across the state are already planning for the primary election. We are getting ballots prepped and proofed and printed right now and lining up our precinct election officials to work the polls. So we're in the midst of this election season already, and any change like this would require significant training of our staff, as well as the thousands of essentially volunteer poll workers across the state, because there is still an election day registration process that is available. So we would have to now add this additional training to our poll workers, which I know they're more than capable of handling. It just adds additional time that we have to spend with them ahead of time.
So because our state does allow same-day voter registration, that complicates a very busy election day, how that runs even more.
Absolutely. We strongly encourage all voters to make sure that their registration is current ahead of the pre-registration deadline. But Iowa law does allow voters to register up until on election day. And if they were to do that, that means that those voters will be showing up at their polling location, having to bring not only the proof of identity and residency, but additionally proof of their citizenship, which is, again, one more document that we will have to train our poll workers on how to interpret and validate that document. And it just, essentially it adds additional steps, slows the process down, and it puts some additional requirements and maybe some concerns on the poll workers about, am I doing this correctly?
Linda Sarah Hagedorn, League of Women Voters, Iowa Vice President here before the break. I wanted to make sure we get your input, and you'll be with us after the break too. Who in Iowa is most likely to be affected by proof of citizenship requirements? Tell us about the groups, the people who are likely to not have these documents.
Sure. We're hearing a lot about married women. But we know that 8 in 10 married women have changed their name. But, some married women have changed their name more than once. And so if there is divorce and remarriage within that time span, that becomes particularly problematic in proving who you are and keeping that chain of name changes in mind. It'll also...
We just heard, Linda, to get in on that point, we just heard Representative Hinson in a clip say that she's tired of the fear-mongering. I would guess you don't agree with that narrative that it is fear-mongering.
No. Read the bill. I read the bill, and the bill clearly states that you have to have proof of citizenship, such as passport or birth certificate. And if you don't have those, and if this birth certificate doesn't match your name, if you read the bill, it says you have to show who you are and how that chain of events has led to your current name. How strictly that will be enforced is yet to be seen. Nonetheless, that's what the bill says. And if you read the bill, it's clear. Rural workers, rural voters, working class voters, voters of color, older Americans are all less likely to hold a passport or perhaps even have a readily accessible birth certificate. Interestingly, tribal citizens may be especially burdened because they'd be unable to register using only their tribal ID, which is what usually is done now. The SAVE Act would require tribal ID to be supplemented with additional proof of citizenship. Kind of laughable, of course. People who are survivors of natural disasters, these things happen here in Iowa. They may be prevented from registering or re-registering if their passport or original birth certificate was lost or destroyed. Yes, you can always reorder those documents, but if the disaster occurs at a time close to voting, close to registration, that's a problem.
I'm Ben Kieffer, and we'll be right back. You're listening to an archive edition of River to River that originally aired in April of this year. It's River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kieffer. Today we're listening back to a show from April of this year about the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, or the Save America Act. It's a bill that would change requirements for Americans to register and vote. The SAVE Act is still held up in the U.S. Senate. In June, President Trump refused to sign a bipartisan housing bill because of the SAVE Act, and in July, he made a social media post calling on Senate Majority Leader John Thune to cancel the chamber's August break until senators pass the bill. Thune has said repeatedly that the legislation does not have the needed votes. House Republicans have also attempted to create another path for the legislation through the budget reconciliation process. In late July, the House approved a budget framework that included $10 billion for voting-related changes aligned with the Save America Act. But Thune has said Republicans don't have the votes for that approach either. So what is in the SAVE Act? How might it affect Iowans? Let's listen back to that conversation from April. Talking about the Save America Act, this is federal legislation that would require many things, but first and foremost, proof of citizenship like a passport, birth certificate. Every time an American registers to vote or updates their voter registration, Iowa's entire congressional delegation backed it in the House. It's been voted through the House. It's stalled in the Senate, but our two U.S. senators support this. So we're asking what it would actually mean for Iowa voters and election workers. Dave Peterson, political scientist of ISU, with us. Dave Wedmore, Cerro Gordo County Auditor. Linda Sarah Hagedorn of the League of Women Voters of Iowa. Linda, finish up what you were talking about, because you're going the specific populations the SAVE Act could affect most. Continue.
Yes, well, I want to start out with saying that the SAVE Act is not addressing any real problems. There's no credible evidence of widespread non-citizen voting nationally. And in Iowa, the Secretary of State reported that 35 counted ballots cast by non-citizens in the 2024 general election out of more than 1.6 million ballots cast. Well, that shows the number was real, but extremely small. So this is a lot of to-do and a lot of burdening Iowa voters over a problem that really doesn't exist.
Let me go to Dave on that point before we move on. Dave, we could frame this as a trade-off. One person voting who shouldn't versus one eligible person being prevented from voting. How should we weigh that when we have the statistics that Linda just mentioned?
No, Ben, I think you're exactly right. I mean, you played that clip from Senator Grassley earlier about distorting the outcome of elections. And, as you just sort of tried to put it, right, one person voting who should not have voted distorts the election exactly the same amount as one legally eligible voter being denied access to the ballot box. And so when we think about things like this, one way to think about this is which group is larger? The number of people who are ineligible voters who vote, which, as Linda just pointed out, is vanishingly small, or the number of people who otherwise would have been eligible and legal to vote who are now denied and disenfranchised according to this bill, which also, as Linda pointed out, is much, much larger, right? So if Senator Grassley wants to talk about distorting our elections, he's focusing on exactly the wrong side of the distortion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Linda, to you, to finish up with the groups that are likely to be most affected by this change. Should it go through?
I'd like to talk about college students. Today, in Iowa, a college student can use a student ID from a Iowa high school or college as proof of identity, as long as it's current, it's valid, it has a photo, and an expiration date. And if the ID does not show the current address, well, the student just uses another document to prove residence, maybe a lease, a utility bill, a bank statement, and so on. But the SAVE Act asks for documentary proof of U.S. citizenship, a passport or a birth certificate. And we know that many, perhaps even most, college students are not going to have those documents at their fingertips. So In Iowa, college students can register at their campus address, and under current Iowa rules, they can prove their identity and residence with practical documents. But the SAVE Act would be different because it would require documentary proof of citizenship, and many students living on campus will not have a certified birth certificate or passport sitting in their dorm room. So it will definitely affect those students. The bigger answer to all of this is that when we register to vote, we already swear under penalty of perjury that I am a citizen of the United States. It's already there on that Iowa form. And so a lot of this just seems to be unnecessary. Again, I go back to a problem that doesn't look like it really exists.
Okay, well, about just over 10 minutes left of our discussion. I want to make sure our listeners get a good bit of input here. Sarah has been waiting patiently. Thank you very much. Where are you calling from, Sarah?
Des Moines.
Yeah, welcome to our program. What's your input here? What's your take on this discussion?
I just wanted to point out one other group who are U.S. citizens and have often had problems with people who don't believe they're citizens. And that's anyone who is born a U.S. citizen overseas. The consular report of birth is a U.S. birth certificate, but it says they were born overseas. So when you say if you can prove you were born in the U.S., that's great. But you can also be born outside the U.S. and be a citizen. And my sons have had to argue with people about getting a driver's license or registering to vote because they say, well, that's not a U.S. birth certificate. You weren't born here. You're not a citizen. And that's not right. There's anyone whose parents were in the military, who were working overseas for the government or for private industry, and the kids were born overseas, is a U.S. citizen if at least one of their parents was a U.S. citizen.
Okay, thank you very much. Good point. So let's let me go back to you, Dave, here, because we talked about the momentous changes this would be in our federal voting law. We have to go back to the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act in the mid-'60s, I think, to see something this big. Is it on that scale? Is it larger? What's the closest comparison we have here?
I mean, I think you're right. I think the Voting Rights Act is the biggest example of this. We've had other smaller ones. We had the Help America Vote Act after the 2000 election. But the Voting Rights Act of 1965, is the last time where we've had this massive federal outreach to shape and fundamentally change the way that local elections, state and local elections are managed. Right? The Voting Rights Act was passed because of Jim Crow, because of the systematic disenfranchisement of African Americans in the South. It was expanded to include the disenfranchisement of Latinos in the American Southwest in particular. And that's really the sort of scale of this, is that it would just ultimately reshape how every American registers to vote and ultimately who can vote in this country.
Mm-hmm. Kathy in Fairfield writes us an email with a really great question. If you are, and Adam, I want to direct this to you if I may. If you are currently registered, she asks, registered to vote, do you have to register if the SAVE Act passes? Or does that, I guess, grandfathered in, if that's the right term or not? Adam, what's your answer for Kathy and all the others who are probably in that same situation?
Sure, yeah. And that's a question we've been getting frequently. And what we've been telling people is we believe this only affects voters who are changing their address, changing their name, doing any sort of update to their current voter registration, or a person registering for the first time. However, we end that with, but we have to wait and see how it is formally signed and implemented and then interpreted, because there could be some variations of that. We are hopeful that if this were to go through, we would not have to purge the voter rolls and start all over. But again, we have to wait and see.
Okay, that boggles the mind if you purge voter rolls and have to go from a clean slate, doesn't it, Adam?
It would
be your business.
It would be rather extensive. I can assure you that probably no county in the state of Iowa is equipped to handle that right now, which is why we're very hopeful that this does go through. It would only affect voter changes to the registration or new registrations.
TJ in Coralville listening has another question. He says, I'm as opposed to these changes as I could be, but I want to point out one thing. Dave earlier said that your address is on your passport. I checked mine, and passports include a state of birth, not the address. If this terrible legislation, he writes, passes, it's very important that listeners have their documents in order. Dave, he mentions you in that email. You want to respond to TJ?
Oh, he's absolutely right. It does. Yeah, no, that was my mistake.
Oh, okay. Adam, anything to add there for TJ?
Yeah, well, no. And as far as the documents required, we understand that passport would certainly be used, but I can tell you while the passport is a document that can currently be used to prove your identity, it would not be necessarily acceptable for residency because we cannot get to the precinct level. But again, that's a very low, not an often used form of identification here that we see for voter registration purposes.
Okay, so but that's what you passport or your birth certificate, right? That's what we have.
There are a few other documents that are listed in the bill, such as a tribal document with some supplemental information. But essentially, yes, it's rather limited in scope, and a lot of the documents, like I said, are not documents that commissioners of elections are used to examining or utilizing for these purposes. So it would require some extensive training to make sure that we're doing it correctly and so forth.
Okay, so much to cover here, and we want to get to that executive order. Dave, to you on this to really give us the key facts here as you see them. The president signed an executive order a few days ago directing the DHS and the Social Security Administration to build a nationwide list of verified eligible voters and to bar the Postal Service from sending absentee ballots to anyone not on that list. Is this technically feasible? What's from a political science point of view, what is the president trying to do here?
I mean, the president has a long history of being disgruntled at mail-in voting, despite the fact that he uses it. And so I think this is continuing that sort of broadside attack on the vote-by-mail system in this country. You know, we've had vote-by-mail, essentially at least some vote-by-mail, essentially since the country's founding. Several states have moved to all vote-by-mail. What the executive order is trying to do is to make databases that aren't designed to talk to each other. Right? We don't have a federal national list of voters. That doesn't exist, right? We have 50 different state ones, sort of 49 in North Dakota is weird. But we don't have one big list. And so what the president would like is to make state level stuff talk to the post office, talk to the Social Security Administration, talk to these other databases. And they're just fundamentally not designed to do that. And particularly, as I think it was Adam pointed out, right, if we're going to have to do this in a hurry, that's going to get done through some simple ways like name checking or name matching. So we'll match, the person A in database 1 to person A in database 2 by name match. There are 3 Dave Petersons who work at Iowa State University. So I'm personally skeptical that that system's actually going to work. We've seen examples of this in the past with voter rolls, where states with felon disenfranchisement have extended the you can't vote if you're convicted of a felony to convicted of a felony in other states. And so they've pulled felon lists from other states, matched it to their voter rolls, and they did name match. And so there's cases of state legislators being denied the ability to vote because somebody with their name in another state is convicted of a felony. I mean, this type of, there's 300 plus million Americans, and trying to make all of these files match is a logistical nightmare that is going to have a huge problem of mistakes, right? We're going to attach the wrong people to the wrong names to the wrong files, and it's going to systematically disenfranchise a huge swath of the American public.
Mm-hmm. Adam, from the county level auditor, what do you think of this executive order? What's the chatter among fellow county auditors?
Yeah, same. It's very similar to what we've been hearing with the proposed SAVE Act. Is it's significant changes and that would have to be implemented very quickly and would drastically change how elections are administered and ran here across the state.
President Trump called mail-in voting fraud legendary. Dave, you mentioned this. 2025 Brookings Institute report found it occurred roughly 0.0, let's see, there are 4 zeros to 4.3. It's vanishingly small. About 4 cases per 10 million. There's a way to say it. Dave, how do you square that with the scale of what's being proposed here?
What's being proposed is completely out of line with the problem. As Linda talked about this earlier, that there are occasionally a handful of ineligible voters who vote, often because they don't realize they're ineligible. And that's rare, and it almost, it doesn't have any real effect on election outcomes. And so we're proposing these massive changes that are going to be mistake prone, that even when they're not making mistakes, are going to systematically remove people from the voter rolls in ways that will have large implications for the outcome of our elections. And so it's just completely outside the scope of what's needed.
Mm-hmm. We have just a few minutes left. I feel we had this part of the program, a large smorgasbord in the ballroom and really very small plates to serve ourselves and very little time to eat it. But I want to give each of you a parting few words. Linda from the League of Women Voters of Iowa, what thought do you want to leave us with?
Well, I want to say that putting the Postmaster General and the Postal Service in charge of who gets an absentee ballot is a bad idea, because the Postal Service is supposed to deliver ballots, not decide who's eligible to receive them.
All right. Adam Wedmore, your final words for today.
If you have questions, reach out to your county auditor. That's exactly what we're here for. We would love to explain in detail the processes and verify your voter registration, because we want to be open and transparent and make sure that every eligible voter has an opportunity to vote.
Dave, what do you want to leave us with?
I mean, the last thing I would say is that a lot of the rhetoric that's been focused on this, a lot of the advocates, the Republicans who are pushing this, focus on voter ID, the need to show an ID when voting. Mm-hmm. And that's not really what's the point of this bill. That's not changing at all. What's changing is what it takes to get on the voter rolls in the first place. And so the idea of, well, you have to show an ID to buy a six-pack, why shouldn't you have to show an ID to vote, is a sort of non sequitur, because it's not what the majority of this bill is going to do, or the majority of this bill is going to change.
Okay, thank you very much, Dave Peterson, Lucan Professor of Political Science at Iowa State University. Adam Wedmore, Cerro Gordo County Auditor, former president of the Iowa State Association of County Auditors, and Linda Sarah Hagedorn, Vice President, the League of Women Voters of Iowa. Fast and furious, we went through it, an important conversation to have. Linda, Adam, Dave, and all our listeners, thank you very much for joining in.